Hello? Okay. We'll get started. Today actually we got quite a lot of things to cover, and I prepared like 3 separate lectures. They are all related to in terms of layout of a web page, and these are all new this year, so you don't have the video yet. Okay, so I have to go through them. So expect that will take the whole 1.5 hours. Okay, so we're going to first start with the concept called responsive design. And how many people heard of responsive design before? Hands up. Okay, don't be shy. Okay, so this is something which is very common now. I mean, even you never heard of, you probably use it all the time anyway. It's nothing fancy, and it just makes, say, a web page which will change its display depends on the size of display device. So when the web page will look good on the desktop with a monitor, but it will adjust itself so it's still visible or usable on, say, a mobile phone. Because if we just scale it down from a desktop monitor to a mobile phone, everything will be just simply become too small and has become not usable. So this is where the responsive design comes in, and it is something actually you can do with CSS. Okay, and as I mentioned, this is, and I think recent study shows people actually spend, and the pages people actually, for example, Google search, people do more search on mobile compared to, say, desktop versions. So you definitely need some design specifically for mobile. So this is an example. Say let's say a website about food, and then you can have the what look like on a desktop monitor. And this is what it looks like on a tablet, which has slightly smaller devices, a display area. And you can see, and the sidebar is now no longer visible, and they actually moved on to the top. And the rest of the same, it can still visible, and on the, say, even smaller device, and they look like this. And there's less things and visible, but at least the site is still usable. Yeah, so that's the whole point of responsive design. Yeah, question?
Are we expected to use this for our first coursework?
Okay, so the question is, for the first coursework, and do you have to do responsive design? And the answer is no. So strictly speaking, there's no marks and for responsive design elements, but I think that's something useful to know anyway, so I'll cover it. And actually, yeah, maybe next year I'll introduce that. Something, yeah. Okay, and actually, so in the real world, like in industry, when now people design a website, they actually would start the other way around. So instead of starting from the desktop version, many people would now start from the mobile version, make sure their website works well on the mobile, and before they move on to bigger displays. Okay. Okay. So to make your design or your web page responsive, so first you have to make sure, say, things like images on your web page, so website, change the size according to the display size. And this is something relatively easy to do. And all you need to do is, instead of setting the size, for example, the width of a picture as pixels, and which is device dependent, or say, and if you set a image size depends on a monitor and a desktop monitor, and it will probably be too big or too small actually on a display on a mobile device, and just set it as a pixel, as a percentage. So if you want a picture always cover the entire width of the browser, and just set the width to 100%, and then it doesn't matter whether it's a monitor, a big monitor, or small mobile phones, so that cover the entire width of the display. And the other things we see a little bit early on in the example is, for example, you have a sidebar initially display on the left or right hand side, and say when the image as the display device becomes smaller, you want to say either it move to the top or maybe even collapse entirely, and that's something a little bit harder to do. And something could help is called a grid-based layout, and which we're going to cover a little bit later. Okay, and So you do this, say change the layout of a page based on something called media queries in CSS. Again, that's something very, and only being introduced very recently. Okay, we can start with image and media. Okay, and so by default, and if you don't set the size of a picture, it will just, the browser will try to display the picture at its original size. So if you have the full resolution picture taken directly from, say, a digital camera or your mobile phones, it will usually be much wider than what a monitor would be able to display. And so this is something that might happen. And if you have a picture which would work perfectly fine in a browser on the left-hand side, and when you display on a smaller display, and just because this picture does not change size, still stay with the original size, and you will see this one, do not see everything, and the bottom one, you will not be able to see most of it. Okay, and so alternatively, as I mentioned, you can do this by adding a percentage as a width of the picture. So the percentage will be changed, depends on the size of the display. And in this example, we have a photo. We said maximum width is 100%. So if we look at 100% first, that just means it always tries to do, the maximum it get is the whole width of the entire screen. So when you look in the portrait mode, that will be the width of the display of the portrait, which is a bit smaller. And when you look in the landscape mode, and again, it's the maximum of the width of the screen, which is a bit larger. And the other thing you need to mention, of course, if you have this on a tablet or even desk monitor, the picture will be always bigger, but try to, say, cover 100% if you can. And that's the other part comes in, it says maximum width. So, for example, when the image is displayed at full resolution and still not be able to cover the entire width of the monitor, just imagine you have a very big monitor, maybe something like this, and it will just display at full resolution of the image, rather than always cover the entire 100% width of the display. So that's what the maximum width for. And sometimes if that's not what you wanted. For example, you want the image always to cover the entire width, no matter, say, the width is bigger than, say, the actual size of the picture, and just use a width, and it will stretch the image if the resolution of the picture is not enough. And let me see if we need to. Okay, and this is a simple example. I'll make the text a little bit bigger. And the whole point here is just says, and the width of the image will be always 100%, and then depends on the size of the display, which you can change, and the picture will change its width. That's it. So this is something very simple to do, and make the picture responsive.
Sorry, what's the difference between this and display cover?
Display cover?
Same, sort of.
I'm not sure it's exactly the same, and so maybe we can talk about that.
Up
Yeah.
to the screen height.
Yeah, the cover. I try to remember what the cover is referred to, and in some.
It's playing in a full width and height.
Maybe, but I have to check. Yeah, I don't know exactly what the difference is. Yeah. For example, if I change to okay, so this is the effect when I set the width as instead of width 100%, I set the maximum width 100%. So that means when the picture reaches full resolution, it will not increase any further. So in this case, you can see it stays like that, and once it becomes small, which is less than its full resolution, it will reduce its size to fit 100% width. Okay, and so that's a way. So grid-based design is a way how do you locate or lay out the components on your web page. And actually, the next two lectures will be talk about this. One is using Css Grid, the other one is using the grid system based on to the Bootstrap. Okay, and going to talk this in more details a little bit later. Okay, so this give you a general idea of how the grid layout might look like, or grid-based design. So in this case, you have a fixed width, says 960 pixels for the entire page. Okay, this is not always recommended, but you can do that. So you can, and you want to say this is the header part of your page. You want to be across the entire page. And this is part where your main content of the text and pictures goes, and you want to have a width of 600 pixel, and then this part, which is sidebar, have 300 pixel width, and finally have a footer, which across the entire page again. So that forms a very simple grid, and we're going to see more details later. Okay, and this is an example when you're starting to apply a grid-based design to a web page, but instead of using responsive design, you're using pixel-based, which is basically fixed width. So that's when you're starting to have scroll bars. For example, when the screen is not big enough to show the entire web page. For example, in the previous example, we set as 960 pixels. So the screen resolution is smaller than this, and you're starting to see the scroll bars on the side. Okay, so that's the website, and it has a fixed width for the page, and currently it looks fine. But when it goes smaller, for example, the width now is less than what you needed, and you can see things does not change, and part of the page is now become blocked. So long as it's larger than the width defined, that's okay. And you can have the header and main content and sidebar, and finally the footer at the end. This form a grid, but this is not responsive so far. Okay, and this is exactly the same example as before, and this is with fixed width, so which is not responsive. Okay, again, to fix this problem, it's relatively easy. All you need to do is, instead of setting the width using a pixel number, just using setting as a percentage. Okay, and you can still use something like maximum width to ensure the page will not go wider than certain values. Okay, so in this example, you can see I set the maximum width as 960 pixels. Again, just similar to the examples with the pictures, and that's when the display width larger than 960 pixels, and the web page itself will not increase any further. But what changes later is actually it sets the width of the main part at 62.5 and the percentage. The important thing here is the percentage. So actual value is less important, but it says roughly 2/3 of the width will be used to display the main content, and the remaining bit will be used to display a sidebar, and there's a little bit, say, gap between the two as well, so these two does not add up to 100%. So that will become the gap between the two, give you a little bit of space. Okay, so if you look at the same website again, this time with the percentage set, and so you can see up to here, so roughly here, is where you reach the 960 maximum width, and after that, the width of the page no longer increase. But when it's smaller than 160 pixels, it automatically reduce the size, okay, and of both the main content and the sidebar to fit into the given width. But actually, it go one step further. It's actually when smaller than certain size. It actually, instead of showing the sidebar on the side, move onto the bottom. This way allows you to see more content, the main content a bit better. So this is something actually you need to do. We'll cover later on using something called media query. And by setting the width and as percentage will allow you certain changes ranges and between as the size of or the width of the display changes. And for example, I can change the width. I can undo the maximum width so you can see the effects when it is for the
What's in the corner? When you highlight the body, it shows in the left bottom corner.
sorry, the
It shows in the left bottom corner.
left bottom.
Yeah, up.
No, I'm looking for the maximum width to see if I can disable that one, so you can see the results without. Okay, just here. And okay, let me make this slightly bigger. And so when I select this div, and you can see these are the CSS applied to that particular div, and you can see this is where the maximum width is applied, and you can untick it, and that basically means I don't want to set a maximum width. Now the page will always change, try to fill the entire screen size, no matter how wide it is. So you can see previously it will stop at a certain stage. Now as you further increase, it's still, this part is about, the main content is about 2/3 and the left hand side is about 1/3. Okay, that's the effect of the maximum width. And if you turn this back on, you can see, okay, it will try to stick with maximum 960 pixels. So obviously one of the reasons is because the setting of these pictures, and so you want to set the width maximally to the pictures of these pictures, so it will keep increasing and always fill the entire column. Okay, now we're going to have a look at media queries, and which will help you create the effect when, say, the sidebar will move to the bottom or the top, and when the width becomes relatively small. So it is something relatively new in CSS3, and the keyword you need to use is @media. So that is a thing you need to add to your CSS. Okay, and so this is the keyword. So this should be part of your CSS file, or maybe in the style tag in your HTML. And you say @media. Only this part means a screen. So when the when the website is displayed on the screen, and you say the maximum width is 500 pixel, and you use this and formatting rules. In this particular case, is set background color to light blue. So if we look at the example, so this is a relatively simple one. It says when on screen and the maximum width is 600 pixel and the background will be light blue, and otherwise the background color will be green. So this is what has happened now, and currently the size is 625, so the background is green. If you reduce it, say now it's 600, now it becomes blue, and you can keep changing and changing back. So this is a very simple example which only shows changing the background color, but you can also use that to change, for example, the position of your sidebars. You can say, when on screen the maximum width is 600 pixels, I want to put the sidebar, for example, at the bottom. Yeah, does that make sense? Something you can easily say just changing by, for example, previously you might using float left. Anyone know what float left does? To put the sidebar onto the right hand side. It's a bit confusing, but you can either just stop floating, and then the sidebar will move to the bottom. And exactly the same thing. So you will need two rules, one for the normal display and another one for smaller sizes. And you can actually have more than one, they call cutoff point or threshold. For example, you can have one design for tablets and another one for smartphone. So you may say for 600 pixels, I want to display this way, and for 300 pixels, which is even smaller device, I have another different layout. Okay, so this is a very simple example just to show you how the media query works, or the media keyword. And as I mentioned before, now in practice, most people would start designing for the mobile device first, and to make it work better on bigger displays. And besides the fact that, say, people are now spend more time to look at the web page on the mobile device, it's usually harder to fit a bigger design into a small device rather than the other way around. If it works on the mobile device, which is very small display, mostly likely to work fine when you have more space. You just to make sure it still looks nice enough. Don't have a lot of white space. Okay, so that's the previous examples. It set up a rules for a maximum width. One is 500. I want to change the background. Or alternatively, you can have an entire different style sheet just for a different screen size. And so this says this is something you will include not in your CSS but in the head section of your HTML page. The rest is the same. Link relationship is style sheet, and you add this part. Say media equal to only screen and maximum width is 500 pixels. That means when the screen width is less than 500 pixels, the browser would load this particular style sheet and apply the rules in there. Okay, and in the previous examples, we use media query, and we only used one condition, which is the width. But it actually supports many other examples, and you can say apply different CSS rules depends on the height, or depends on the device width. Okay, so the device width is different from the width because, even on the monitor, the device width of a monitor is always fixed, but the width of the browser window can be much smaller than the actual display or the monitor width. And you can use, say, orientation, which will be useful on the mobile device when you're either in the landscape or portrait mode, and some other things. Okay, let me see. Okay, if going to change. Okay, so this is one of the possibility, and if you want to move your sidebar not on the side anymore when display is small, this is one of the way to do it. Okay, and so it says here when the screen size is bigger than 480, you do float left, which is put these things on the left, and this no longer applies when it's less than 480. If you look at here, which is about to happen right now, and when it's no longer float left, it will move on to the top, and because it appears before the main content in the HTML file. And yes, and if these items which appears after the main content, then it will actually appear below the main content. I can demonstrate this very quickly. So, if I take these, which are the sidebars, and put them after the main. And you will see, oops. I didn't put it in. Okay, so I'll give you a slightly different result. And by default, it has float left, so it goes to the left. And when it's become smaller than 480 pixels, because then the float no longer working, and because they appear after the main text, so it moves to the bottom. Okay, and you can use other conditions and describe here as well. And so, okay, so these widths you set in the media query, like 600 pixels, and is called the breakpoints. And okay, and usually you would have maybe 2 breakpoints, and depends on how a website is designed. You can have 1 breakpoint in terms of width, for example, or either height for your smartphone or smaller devices, and 1 for the tablet or similar media-sized devices, and the default one for the laptop or the larger devices. Let's have a look at the example. And that's where is the breakpoint? Assigned padding box shadow. That's the width with the columns. Let me see, I didn't see any. Okay, and probably this is not the right examples.
It says media over there.
Oh, okay, yeah. There's media here. So it's maximum with 768 pixels for mobile iPhone class. Column with 100%. Okay. Okay, so this is a slightly more advanced examples, and using media queries, we already seen how to use this part, which is the same as before. Say for width up to this much, you use this, but this is something a little bit new. We haven't said before. What it says is I set all the classes which start with COL dash and set the width to 100%. So basically you can see there's lots of different classes here which start with COL dash. And is there any more? No, mostly just those. So when it's rich and and below this threshold, then it changes all those widths to the entire width of the page. That's what this part does. Yeah, I was expecting to see actually 2 values, but not in this example. Okay, so let me see time. Yeah, and so that's all I want to talk about in terms of the responsive design, and show you some simple examples using media queries. But in general, it's actually quite difficult to set up media query yourself, and that's why other libraries help you to do it. For example, Bootstrap, we're going to cover a little bit later on. But first, we're going to go to the CSS Grid, and which allows you to lay out or position your items on the page and use a grid-based layout. Okay, I'm going to switch to next one.